Welcome to Environmental Intelligence, Episode 50 for June 29th, 2026. Your Environmental Intelligence Briefing. Starting the week with the environmental regulatory developments that matter for your practice. Federal interprovincial transmission announcement sets stage for accelerated electrification compliance reviews across Western provinces. A federal announcement on interprovincial transmission lines signals expanded grid capacity that will affect carbon pricing and electrification timelines for industrial sites. In British Columbia, updated risk assessments for glacial lake outburst floods highlight the need to integrate climate-driven hydrology into contaminated site closure planning. Practitioners should review federal energy policy documents this week for project-specific implications. If you only know one thing today for your compliance calendar, review federal interprovincial transmission documents for corridor overlap with active EPEA and EMA sites in Alberta and BC, with ongoing consultation windows in play. The federal government announced support for new interprovincial transmission infrastructure to advance an electrified future. This development builds on existing federal authorities under the Impact Assessment Act and CEPA provisions governing energy projects. Prior requirements emphasized provincial-level approvals. The new framework introduces coordinated federal-provincial permitting that shortens timelines for cross-border lines. Consultants managing contaminated sites near proposed corridors must now evaluate whether expanded transmission affects groundwater flow or vapor intrusion pathways in current assessments. Alberta and BC practitioners should map transmission routes against active EMA and EPEA files this quarter. Next steps include monitoring Canada Gazette notices for detailed implementation guidance on project thresholds. The announcement establishes coordinated federal support for new transmission capacity linking provincial grids. This changes prior siloed provincial approvals by introducing federal facilitation that affects project sequencing under the Impact Assessment Act. Site professionals must evaluate whether new corridors intersect contaminated land parcels, requiring updated risk assessments. Climate-driven glacier retreat has increased the annual probability of outburst flooding from Place Glacier, with debris flow pathways now extending closer to developed areas. The finding directly informs flood risk mapping requirements under BC EMA contaminated sites guidance when assessing downgradient receptors. Practitioners conducting Phase 2 work in the Sea to Sky corridor should incorporate updated hydrological modeling into receptor evaluations. Grid expansion will require environmental assessments for new rights-of-way that may overlie or owe joining existing contaminated sites. This creates immediate demand for baseline soil and groundwater data along proposed routes in Alberta and British Columbia. Contractors should prepare to integrate transmission corridor constraints into remediation scheduling and closure reporting. There's a nuance here worth understanding on the glacial lake side in British Columbia. A routine Phase 2 ESA in the Squamish-Lillooet corridor returns clean results on paper. Yet the client's closure application stalls because the ministry now requires explicit evaluation of climate-amplified flood pathways that could remobilize residual contaminants. Under BCCSR Protocol 1 and the EMA Contaminated Sites Regulation, practitioners must demonstrate that current conceptual site models account for changing hydrology, not just static ONE 100-year floodlines. The experienced assessor notices that standard topographic contours miss the debris flow fans and outburst surge volumes, now projected for Place Glacier and similar features. These events can deposit or erode material across tens of hectares in hours. Cross-reference the latest provincial flood hazard mapping updates with site-specific LiDAR and add a sensitivity scenario that assumes a 20 to 30% increase in peak discharge under RCP 4.5 conditions. The mistake I see most often is treating glacial lake risks as a separate geotechnical exercise rather than embedding them in the receptor and exposure pathway analysis required for risk-based closure. The fix is straightforward. Insert a single paragraph in the risk assessment report that quantifies the probability-weighted remobilization volume and confirms monitoring wells remain protective under the revised flood envelope. If you're working on transmission-adjacent sites in Alberta or BC, review federal interprovincial transmission documents for corridor overlap with active EPEA and EMA files. If you're managing Phase 2 or risk assessment work near Place Glacier, update site conceptual models to include glacial lake outburst flood scenarios. Brief clients on potential schedule impacts from coordinated federal-provincial permitting on transmission-adjacent remediation projects. Monitor Canada Gazette for detailed implementation guidance on the transmission framework within the next 30 days. Mark your calendar for ongoing federal consultation on interprovincial transmission implementation details. BC Ministry review of updated glacial lake hazard mapping for infrastructure adjacent sites, and continued monitoring of federal energy policy effects on carbon pricing compliance timelines. Tomorrow, watch for further details on federal consultation windows for the transmission framework. That's environmental intelligence for today. If this briefing is useful to your practice, share it with a colleague and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be back with the next briefing. Have a productive day. And if you'd rather watch than listen, find us on YouTube at NARA Network. Links in the show notes. And before you go, this show is part of the NARA Network, a family of daily podcasts on tech, science, and markets, each one a short, sharp briefing you can finish on the commute. If today earned its place in your feed, here's your next listen. Tesla Shorts Time, your daily deep dive into everything Tesla. Find every show free at naranetwork.com. This episode used AI voice synthesis of my voice. Editorial selection and analysis are my own.